right, it's Orange Pill Pod time. Max Kaiser, Stacy Herbert, coming to you from San Salvador and El Salvador. So, Stacy, this is the huge banner headlines screaming across the globe. El Salvador pays back $800 million maturing bond. President Nayib Bukele says the country was the first in the world to use Bitcoin's legal tender. El Salvador's $800 million bond issue set to mature on Tuesday has been repaid with interest. Finance Minister Alejandro Zelaya confirmed in the past year, almost every legacy international news outlet said that because of our, quote, Bitcoin bet, El Salvador was going to default on the debt in January of 2023. Since we had an $800 million bond maturing today, Bukele said, literally hundreds of articles. Bukele noted that he's only been able to find one article from a Colombian newspaper that's published news of the repayment. Stacy, this is really just taking everybody by surprise who had no expectation for this to happen.
Well, of course, it didn't take anybody who watches this podcast or reads the president's tweets. They were never going to default. El Salvador was never going to default. They were always going to pay their debts. President Bukele said that over and over. And instead, the international rating agencies, remember, Fitch did downgrade El Salvador in September, where they downgraded them to triple C. So they're like junk rated. And they downgraded them based on the argument that they would default. They said that it was highly probable that they would default in January 23rd, when the debt matured. The same day, of course, that Max Kaiser matured too.
That's right. I turned 63 on that very day, and they repaid this $800 million debt plus interest. And, you know, talking to people here and professional people and political people, you know, they mentioned that the FUD and the anti-Salvador press corps out there, you know, they use the rating agencies are really an extension of this press, the corrupted press, and they use the rating agencies rating, you know, whether it's double B, triple C, A minus, A plus. This is really used as not to signify what the underlying strength of the asset is, because clearly they mispriced this asset by a huge mile. I mean, and they didn't even come close. But what's remarkable to me is how the rating agencies, along with the banks, along with the financial press, they all gang up. They all work together. They all collude to discredit folks that they don't like and to lionize the people they do like. And just because El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender, for some reason, well, I know the reason, obviously, the fiat money world was a big threat, and they gang up.
Yeah, obviously partly that, but we've interviewed Jose Lopez, who is El Salvador's new Bitcoin diplomat to Lugano for our Bitcoin embassy there. And it was like 6 or 7 months ago, he pointed out quite rightly, I think, that debt across the entire spectrum is mispriced in El Salvador for the nation, for companies, and for individuals. It's mispriced, that they have to pay a much higher rate because of things like Fitch, because of the global financial system. So when, you know, the fiat system is based on, you know, the U.S. gets to print it, the New York Fed gets to print it, the banks get to print it, their friends get cheap money, high rated and cheap money. And the further out you go, this is kind of part of that quintillionaire system, where the further away you are from power, the more expensive your debt is, the lower your credit rating. So across the spectrum, from here in El Salvador, I was just speaking to an entrepreneur yesterday, in fact, and he is rated A1, which is the highest individual credit rating you could have here as an individual. And yet he's paying like 10, 11% to borrow here. You know, that puts the entire nation at a disadvantage. Of course, also with the fiat system, by disadvantaging the individual Salvadoran, the corporate Salvadoran, and the country itself, what it does is it drives them into the hands of the IMF and these global institutions where they have to borrow at a lower than market rates, so they'll lend to them. But of course, they have to destroy the entire economy, basically, thus again, causing the individuals and the corporations within that country to never be able to access credit at the same rate that other people in the U.S. On a dollar standard get to access their money at.
Yeah, we came up with this term interest rate apartheid, right? So interest rates are used to create Bantustans, where those who don't have access directly to the Fed or they're not Wall Street banks, they have to pay these exorbitant fees. And but if you do have access to the Fed or you're friends of the Fed, you end up paying incredibly cheaper rates for money. And when you pay incredibly cheap rates for money, the ability to make more money with your money goes up. If you're paying a lot of interest for the borrowed money, of course, your ability to make money on that borrowed money, and a lot of times, is virtually impossible if your cost of funds is in excess of whatever hopes you have in the profit potential. And credit card rates continue to move up. They never went down during when rates went to zero. Credit card rates never went down below 16%. Even though if it was a true interest rate curve, rates would have come down across the board, including credit card rates, and you would have had your Visa, MasterCard would have had a 5% rate if rates on the Fed were zero. But they never went down to below 16 or 17%. And now they're, climbing higher because interest rates are moving higher. So interest rates are really an talked about fulcrum or a wedge, that's used to kind of for favoritism and cronyism, isn't it?
It's kind of like the banality of evil, as we talked about. It's a soft war. It's weaponization of the financial system, and we've talked about that on our programs over the years. The weaponization of the dollar, which removed its money-like qualities. Right, so the U.S. Treasury used to be layer one money. It still kind of is. It's like hanging in the air as if like Wile E. Coyote. Like it doesn't realize it's all fallen apart. But from the weaponization of SWIFT that first happened against Iran, I think back in like 2011 or 2012. And of course, we were reporting during the lead up to the Russia-Ukraine war, it was similar sort of economic, financial, monetary warfare. And what I mean by that is like the financial press kept on repeating the same lies that whoever told them. I mean, the Twitter files show us that they're told to say or promote certain lines of thought, right? The talking points. So we know that what they were saying, because we were reporting on it, is that Russia would default. And you're like, their national debt is like 10% of GDP. They have huge reserves of gold and U.S. treasuries. But of course, in their mind, I guess they could argue that because they already had plans back in like 2014 to seize those $600 billion and $650 billion in U.S. Treasury reserves.
Right. Well, you move away from an economy based on commodity and price discovery on commodities during that period of financialization that started in the 1980s with deregulation and Reagan and Thatcher, and we moved into an era really up until a couple of years ago, especially 1 year ago, where the ability to move rates and bond markets gave countries the power to dictate economic policy broadly across the globe, regardless of what the actual cost structure were for the commodities that were running the globe. But that seems to have all changed now, and it has to do with a few things. Number one, you've got the emerging markets and the BRICS are saying, guess what? We're kind of moving away from the dollar as aggressively as we possibly can, and we're going to charge actual rates of production for commodities, and that's causing inflation. And then you have El Salvador that's saying, let's make Bitcoin legal tender. And that just brought in a whole slew of benefits that, getting back to the story about this $800 million bond repayment that was just 3 months ago given a possible, a chance of happening of near zero by the rating agencies with a CCC rating, happening flawlessly without any problem. And that kind of benefit is just percolating throughout the entire economy. It has a knock-on effect, Stacy. Like we see it with tourism, we see it with entrepreneurialism, we see it just percolating throughout the whole economy.
Yeah, but I would also point out, and very importantly, it's not just El Salvador. Like I said, it was that situation with Russia. You saw the Twitter files as exposing this. And what I'm saying is that, El Salvador's economy could say quadruple this year, say quadruples in 2023. They could still post headlines, say imminent default, probable default, it gets picked up by or pushed by the algorithms that push the headlines, the trending topics, and then you'll see the buzz that they're going to default, and nobody examines it. They just see the trending topics. They try to create the reality through the machine that they control. They control the algorithm. They control the social credit scores. They control the money printing. They control all of the stuff that is happening, even against Elon Musk, who has now bought Twitter. He owns Twitter as a private company, and yet he still gets subjected to the same algorithms, even though he controls one of the main sources of that
right, the keyword there is buzz.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, even the guy who does all the pizza reviews, he's Barstool Stewart, Dave Portnoy. You know, he was launching an ETF called Buzz, and it was just based on let's trade buzz. And then there's a reverse Jim Cramer ETF where you do the absolute opposite of Jim Cramer, and Jim Cramer just trades on the buzz, and he's just a buzz trader. So it's that if you can control the buzz, which is controlling the media and controlling interest rates, controlling the perception, you can control prices. And if you can have the algorithmic, ability on your side, you can squeak out profits, regardless of what the underlying economic conditions are. And that's where we're in the economy that we're in today. Is that if you can control the buzz, you can control the profits, even regardless of what the underlying fundamentals are. The fundamentals were nowhere to be found, and now they seem to be reasserting themselves.
Well, this is part of that disintegration of what we've been reporting on since 2016. What's happened is the narrative structure has broken down because nobody trusts the ability to spread their FUD relies on enough of the population accepting it, or that if Reuters says it, or if Fitch rates this country's debt as junk and probable default, that like these guys are to be respected, right? They're the elite. They're economists trained at Harvard and Yale, and they're like the best. They run our country, and the largest economy in the world. Like, we should respect them. But and I think it's, what came first, the chicken or the egg? And the fact is, well, we'll get to eggs in a moment, but the fact is that that they've lost the narrative, right? Bitcoin came along. Bitcoiners never did the money printer go brrr, that meme. The meme warfare.
I wanted to get into that.
Stepped into
warfare.
it. Remember the moment that the breakdown began.
Yeah.
That all of this was exposed. The loss of control by the elite was that moment that Hillary Clinton introduced Pepe into the 2016 presidential election. This was before she created the Russia hoax. She said it was Pepe.
Seminal moment.
Yeah. And you were like, we being Bitcoiners, and there are many memers in the space, and Pepe was huge in the Bitcoin space. Like, our minds did the blowing up emoji. Like, we were like, what the hell just happened?
We responded to that meme with another meme in response to a third meme. Right, the Pepe the Frog meme, Hillary Clinton 2016. She took it on board. Yeah. It was invented in the deep, darkest recesses of the internet. Hacker sites, and where a lot of this stuff comes. And she somehow decided to put it out in a national campaign, and it just kind of legitimized the fact that we're in a meme war, and we've been in that meme war seriously now for years. And
hello.
Yeah.
No, in fact, it's important that people understand, if they weren't there, how Pepe came around. Pepe is a racist Nazi, right? Because of 4chan. 4chan made up this story. Why they made up this story is because it was a meme used, it was a cartoon.
Yeah.
And then they picked up on that character. They liked the facial expressions or whatever. Obviously Pepe has brilliant face.
It resonates.
It has a memeable face,
yeah.
right? And memeable eyes. Well, then some celebrities started using it, like the Justin Bieber sort of celebrities. And the 4chan guys got angry.
Yeah.
So they said, guess what? Pepe is a Nazi. And they started saying, using, associating white supremacy, all sorts of horrible stuff about him, in order to just fight back. In the buzz world, they felt like they control the online meme space.
Yeah.
And these like cringe celebrities started using their meme. So they turned the meme into something that they would not want to use or
Right,
be associated
4chan.
with it. Yeah. 4chan created this notion that this just it's a drawing, that the drawing was somehow it took on these
They're
characteristics
the
of a white
deepest
supremacist.
well of the dank meme.
Yes.
Is 4chan.
Yes. So that's what happened is they turned it into
Right.
they're not the ones that created the character. The character was created by an artist, a cartoonist, and they turned it into a meme. And then the meme crossed over to cringe celebrities, and they got angry with the cringe celebrities.
This
and then,
reminds me, back in London, we met up with the folks who were the Yes Men. And they were very big in what they called culture jamming. So they would go into a store, for example, and relabel a product. Instead of it being all natural cereal, they would change the name to it or something, and then they'd record people's reaction to it. And there was the Adbusters was a magazine at that time. I don't know if it's still around. But then the meme wars took that culture jamming notion, and they, of course, went social media with it, and electronic with it, and instantaneous global network with it, and that became a lot more pervasive and pernicious and a big factor on the political level, as demonstrated by Hillary.
well, that's the other thing that ties us to Bitcoin and our story is that the guys on 4chan are just total degens, right? They weren't political before that. What happened is that they're just, like Beavis and Butthead in real life, but like you don't see them individually. They create their memes and avatars and things like that. So when they created this meme, which they they claimed they had no authority to, but they said their meme, because cringe celebrities were using it, was racist. Then comes the election, the 2016 election, and they didn't care about any of the policies, trade deals, ideology, or anything. What they cared about was they saw Donald Trump, and he was obviously, like Pepe, a memeable face, right? So they started creating memes and including Pepe Trump, right? So this became, they didn't care anything about the politics. All they cared about was that he had a memeable face, and therefore they started creating memes about him. Now, when we were at, I think it was 2017, at the Consensus thing in New York, we went to that Coin Center dinner, and we sat next to this woman who she must have been 18. She said she was too young to vote in 2016, but she was a 4chaner, and she said to us, she's like, "Oh no, I knew Hillary wouldn't win. Not that I knew anything about these two people, but I knew I had never seen a meme about her in the 4chan group. But there were all these memes about Trump, so I figured he was going to win."
Right. So it's an attack on the memeable collective unconscious where these memes live. 4chan, used to go to 4chan years ago, and just to look at it and see how it operates. And you just basically, it's bulletin board, and you have thousands and thousands of memes, popping through, and people are just processing thousands, and then one in a 1,000 or one in 10,000 just like hits it out of the park. You're like, yes, that's it. Something just comes along, and then instantaneously the whole group is like, yes, that is definitely, it graduates to being out of the wild or in the wild from, the dank well of the 4chan. And it attacks, it works. It works because it's been tested, with the dankest minds, the degen minds of the world have tested it, and it comes out and it does havoc.
Well, that's why Bitcoin was always going to be the only crypto that worked, right?
Yeah.
No crypto, none of the 25,000 cryptos. They're the equivalent of Hillary Clinton, right? They have nobody memes about them. There are no memes at all about that emerge from the shitcoin community.
Yeah.
All of their memes are just stolen from Bitcoiners. And once they're stolen by Bitcoiners move on to a new meme, right? So all those shitcoiners, for example, like Tom Brady, right, who lost tens of millions of dollars. Okay, he's a great footballer and a good-looking guy, but he lost money on a shitcoin scam artist like SBF. But the thing is, like, he did the laser eyes, but he's not a Bitcoiner, right?
Yeah.
All these like shitcoiners or people who think crypto is the same thing as Bitcoin, they started using laser eyes and things like that, or the Liata. So they steal the memes, and of course, Bitcoiners are different sort of individuals, or different people, and they have a vast well of creativity and good ideas, and that's why they'll always come up with a new meme, whereas all of the shitcoins are just copies
Cut and
of
paste.
Bitcoin, and then copies of the copy of Bitcoin, and further on down.
And the memes.
And
the
memes.
culture.
Yeah.
And how everything that comes with it, they just cut and paste and copy it. And it never has never worked, right? So 20,000, 22,000 copies have never succeeded. And Bitcoin is now emerging after, the halving downtrend that always happens. Looks like it's developing into this new bull market. And I see that the shitcoin market is kind of being left in the dust, which is going to happen at some point. That'll be really the story, is that we don't really have a total separation between Bitcoin and the shitcoin market.
Yeah, I don't care too much about the shitcoins itself. I don't care about them. I kind of, the world is always comes down to that 80-20, right? 80% of the people are always going to be NPCs. They'll always just be nobodies. Like, if everybody was a somebody, like if everybody could be President Bukele, the world would, I don't even know if it would be possible to function, right? Like, somebody like President Bukele comes along every 500 years. The last guy, you have like Alexander the Great, Lorenzo the Magnificent, somebody who like alters the course of history. Like, those sort of guys don't come around very often, right? And it's for a reason. Like, there are certain exceptional people. Not everybody could be exceptional, because then if we were all exceptional, then the bar would have moved,
Right. Well,
right?
we talked about how Bitcoin is a magic mirror. So with President Bukele, he was already probity. He already had a moral and ethical quality to him, and Bitcoin brought it out, and he's president of the country, and it just elevates the country. Whereas with other folks, like you mentioned, Sam Bankman-Fried, the magic mirror of Bitcoin accentuated his worst qualities. The guy was already nebbish to begin with, and then when you have that focused energy of Bitcoin, which is pure good, it rots him from the inside, and he becomes this incredibly terrible person.
Or Roger Ver, who was an early, he still goes by the moniker of Bitcoin Jesus, because he was an early Bitcoiner. Well, I mean, again, he collapsed CoinFlex, right? That an exchange out of the UK, and he collapsed that company because he did not pay his debts, unlike President Bukele, who just paid the debts of El Salvador from a previous government, who, by the way, looted most of the money. He still paid back the debts because they were owed. There was a contract, an inferred contract, that they owed this money. They paid the 800 million. Roger Ver, on the other hand, left a collapse in exchange. I think he owed them something like 40 or 60 million dollars. Now it turns out Genesis, Barry Silbert's company out of New York, and remember, Roger Ver was associated with him with the whole big block thing, right? They were on the wrong side of the fork wars.
The New York War.
What Bitcoin revealed about those guys, well, they're all being wiped out because of who they are. What Bitcoin revealed to us long ago, who they actually were. Well, Roger Ver has failed, according to this lawsuit anyway, alleged to have not paid almost $21 million, $20.9 million. So he doesn't pay his debts, right? Because he thinks, he's that sort of guy, right? Like, he doesn't feel like he has an obligation to pay if he loses big time. Well, El Salvador pays their debts. And that's why Roger Ver will never be a great leader, or Barry Silbert will ever be a great leader, because they don't pay their debts. We've been talking about this, like the Winklevi have many thousands of Bitcoin, 100,000 Bitcoin, and they're multi-billionaires, and same with Barry Silbert. And yet they leave their exchange users, who they went on television, the Winklevi. By the way, you mentioned Dave Portnoy. He went out there to tell Dave Portnoy. He almost wrecked him completely.
Totally.
Dave Portnoy bought Bitcoin because of them. They flew out there, but he also got them into one of their shitcoins. I forget which one, but nevertheless, like, they start fighting each other and like go bankrupt instead of like well, you owe your users $900 million. You're the ones that told them to get into this yield product. Like, just give them the $900 million. You have many billions of dollars. But nope, they're like fighting each other out.
Yeah, it's funny how that whole 2016, 2017 block war period and the New York agreement, of which Barry Silbert and a list of 20 or 25 other executives in the industry at that time signed on to essentially try to increase block size and to commercialize Bitcoin in a way that they felt was necessary for their businesses as startups and VCs. Yes. And it was the nodes, ultimately the plebs, who won the war. And they walked off the battlefield defeated. And but those guys, all those guys from the New York agreement ended up here now in 2022, 2023, really the ship hitting the rocks. And these major folks like at the Winklevoss and others. Is that my mom?
No, I'm just, I realize sometimes I have to look at the script and Max goes, stops immediately as soon as I look at the script or look at the timer or look at, I'm just looking down. And
okay.
So, because I don't have my glasses on too, it's like harder to look at it. So I'm not like suddenly doing something else.
Okay, here. Cool. And then they just like hit the rocks, and these guys, like major institutions, like now they're going belly up. Obviously Barry Silbert. This is a story that's caught the attention of the guys over there, David Bailey at Bitcoin Magazine. He's organizing a whole campaign for the GBTC with Grayscale. Yeah. And the shareholders are being organized, and they're trying to get a major lawsuit going because he's got this enormous pile of Bitcoin that he's charging 2% a year on, and apparently he gambled and lost a significant portion of shares, in the markets and things like that. So again, to get back to this idea where even the earliest guys, and Barry Silbert was very early, and Roger Ver is very early, but it doesn't mean that they got Bitcoin. It doesn't mean that they grokked Bitcoin, that they really understand it through and through.
They didn't deserve it. A lot of people just think, everything is just a way to earn some more fiat. So they don't care what the product is. It could be a Ford Mustang that they're, leveraging up and swapping between each other. They don't care what it is. So the people who get Bitcoin, you see them immediately. And it makes sense that the greatest leader of our generation would be a Bitcoiner, right? It's natural. It was so inevitable. Well, actually, you predicted it with Tour de Meester on our show in 2014.
Yeah, we were trying to find out 2014 Tour de Meester, who's an excellent writer. People should follow him. He's a true Bitcoiner, always has been. And we were trying to, handicap what country would make Bitcoin legal tender because we saw that as really an important phase in the development of the revolution, the movement. And we mentioned a couple of names. Didn't mention El Salvador. It didn't really pop up on anyone's list at that time.
You mentioned Panama because at that time, which was 2014, I'm not sure even that President Bukele was mayor of San Salvador at that time.
No.
But he said it would be a small country, a nimble country, and one in which economic liberty was the foundational principle.
Right.
Panama, kind of has that, but it's pretty much a scamsville, right? Panama, that's what they do. The Panama Papers is just like a money laundering sort of center.
Right, and as I believe, if memory serves, that actually President Bukele at that time was aware of Bitcoin or tweeted about Bitcoin in some way. And then he did definitely do 2016, 2017 that he was tweeting about it then when he was mayor. But you had to come into place, right? Bukele had to be in a place where the magic of Bitcoin came and there was this combustion that occurred in that. Now we have it legal tender. Now we have all these things happening like this $800 million bond. Really the story of the day, $800 million bond paid down with interest. And, this is just another, every day the surprises keep coming where the FUD and the press and the mainstream press, they just are so wrong. And is there going to come a time when these outlets like the New York Times, et cetera, are going to say, we were just dead wrong about El Salvador for the last 5-6 years?
No, because the thing is that when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, what happens over the course of time is that they create for themselves a legal system that justifies it and a moral system that glorifies it. So this is that legal and moral system. The media is part of that plunder system. So they're just bullying, and it's just the end days. And they're bully that has nothing better to do but go na 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 na. So I want to talk a bit more about that whole character thing, because you might hear it in my voice because I feel a little bit sleepy. And I woke up this morning. And I'm gonna bring this story to. We're going to be heading to Austin in like 2 weeks, and we're heading to Austin. And one of the nights that we're there, we're gonna have dinner with Pierre Rochard, who is famously, about selling your chairs. Like you have to be so committed to Bitcoin that you sell your chairs, because that's a waste of capital to just buy a chair. You just sell your chairs and buy some more Bitcoin.
You can sit on the floor.
Yeah, you sit on the chair. So, like, when I woke up this morning, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, it was like 5 or 6 a.m. And I woke up and my throat was all sore.
Yeah.
And I was like, Max wasn't there, and I went out, and he's in the guest room sleeping.
Yeah.
And I went into the kitchen and to the dining room area, and there's a note on the table, and it says,
a note from me to myself.
Yeah, and it says, "Ask Stacy about screaming chair."
Yeah.
And I was like, "What?"
Yeah, so I was up at 2:30 because, lying next to me, I heard this primal guttural sounds, gurgling up from somewhere in the deep cosmos. It was unearthly, and then the pitch started to go higher, and I'm like, that sounds like Stacy. And then somehow it reached this crescendo where you're like, cheers! And I was like, either this is a poltergeist, or I need to call an exorcist. But I'm definitely not. I'm getting out of here though, because this sucker's about to blow. Whatever's going on here. I hightailed it out of there, and I was like, write a note to myself, ask Stacy about the screaming chairs.
I literally, my throat feels like I was at a concert last night. So I was screaming.
Yeah, you were rocking and rolling. You were having, so I mean, it was, I guess the point you're making is that you were in contact with Satoshi.
No, well, a few things that I've thought about since this. So, yeah, I've been thinking of Pierre Rochard, and I was feeling guilty that we're going to be having dinner with him. And how do I explain the fact that, I think we have about 12 chairs in the apartment here, and even more in the house in North Carolina. And I was like, we have way too many chairs, right? For Bitcoiners. How committed are we to this? But then I was thinking about this today, because you said you thought I was possessed.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, Max just totally abandoned me. You're married to me. It's supposed to be for richer or poorer. In sickness or in health.
Yeah.
And
but I'm out of my league. I mean, I needed to call an exorcist. I'm limited in my abilities. I cannot actually exorcise the devil or some demonic possession. I need help from, somebody to come with a little bag. And
no, but you went and fell asleep. There's 100 churches within a 5-minute walk of our place.
I left. My intention was to try to find an exorcist, but by the time I got to the living room, I felt a little tired, so I fell asleep. But I made a note to myself to follow up, because I thought this was important. So I wrote down to ask Stacy about this, and so I think this is something we're gonna, I haven't abandoned you in your moment of primal screeching. I'm on it. I'm on the case. I've got your back. If in fact Satoshi is coming to speak to the world through you, and you're going to give voice to Satoshi, it's coming up now from the innermost sanctum of the protocol, as we head into this new rally. It's a rally time. And the next halving cycle, and as the profound impact of the aesthetic beauty of the protocol lifts the spirit of planet Earth, and the El Salvador model of prosperity, peace, love, and goodness is spread globally, it's all from your bosom into the heart and the soul of the collective unconscious. And we have that massive orgasm, that collective global orgasm I've been talking about now for years. It's on their way.
Anyway, I don't know if Obamacare would even cover exorcism. I don't even know how they do it.
Yeah, it's definitely a priest involved. Apparently, it's a Judeo-Christian thing.
But I think I would have abandoned you too, like, because that's happened to me before. Not that
Oh,
I.
you've had this experience with that with
I wasn't. I was
demonic possessions.
Yes, yes. So when I was like 5, maybe 5 going on 6,
Yeah.
it was like my mom went to Spain and she left us at my aunt's house in upstate New York, and it's this huge house with all these cousins and my aunt, Janet, the Jesus Loves You,
Oh,
Max.
yeah, well, see?
she there were some foster kids there, like a whole bunch of kids in a big house. So they put me in the back room with my great aunt, my dad's aunt, who was a nun, right? Sister St. Gerard.
Oh my God.
And I'll tell you this
This
like
sounds like
crazy
a harem.
story. Yeah. And
Get out.
I was like, again, 5 going on 6. And I sat down on the bed. I remember it was like really high old bed. And she was like, told me that be careful, because the night before she saw a ghost of this dead woman trying to climb in the window. And I was like, I thought it was too much information for a 6-year-old, like 5 going on 6. I thought this I was like, I looked at her with doubt, and I was like, I don't think I'm sleeping in this room, because this sounds like bullshit, right? This
Right.
is like not the room I want to sleep in. So I just like kind of crawled out, and I went into my cousin Patty's room.
Wait a minute. Is this when you were on the floor like,
Yes,
crawling?
yes, I'm going to tell you, because I had the same experience that
Right.
where you had last night.
You're on
Yes.
flat out, and you're like crawling.
I was.
Yeah.
So I went into Patty's room, and she
Yeah.
was like a year. I think she was like in a crib. Right.
Still crib bound.
Yeah.
An easy target
This
for
is
the
how-
devil.
I might have been 4 going on 5. I don't know. It was like I was 5 going on 6. So like she was in her bed and I was sleeping on the floor, and then I heard Stacy, and I woke up, and I thought maybe it was that dead woman that had been in my great aunt's like window.
Right.
So I thought, like, I'm just gonna ignore it, right? Just pretend I didn't hear that. And so I kind of started going back to sleep, and then I heard Stacy. I was like, oh my God, Patty's possessed. Fuck.
But wait a minute.
It's-
if memory serves, one of the first movies you ever saw was The Exorcist.
Yeah, it was Exorcist. Like that same year. So I
Right.
was like,
I think
was,
the first movie I ever saw was The Sound of Music.
Yeah,
Which is a difference
we have a
there.
different generation.
Different times.
Yeah.
With
You're-
Julie Andrews.
You're boomer, I'm Gen X. This is
Right.
how Gen X grew up.
The Gen X grew up on The Exorcist.
No, so I was like, Patty's possessed.
Right,
I'm
of
out of
course.
here. And I'm not going to my sister St. Gerard's room, because there's a dead woman in there climbing in the window. So I was like crawling really slow on my stomach, and she kept like getting louder and like more frequent. Stacy. And I was like,
Yeah, I can totally identify you with this crawling thing, like taking a step, like
like-
there's a ghost
so-
coming, so I'm just going to pragmatically work my way
like maybe the
away
ghost will
from the
notice
ghost,
me.
right? It's like,
Doo-doo-doo.
I'm not
Like,
going to
slow-
panic. I'm not going to
slow-
run.
slow-
I'm just going to I'll just move away from the ghost.
Yeah. So I was like, I'm heading to my cousin Billy's room. And
Right.
like, Patty's room was theoretically nicer because it was just her and I think one of my sisters. And then Billy's room, like the 10 boys were in there, right? So I was like, I'm not, like, no ghost.
Where do you go?
No ghost is going to go there, right?
No, of
So
course
I was like, I crawled there. And as soon as I got out the door from my possessed cousin Patty, like I like ran down the road, the room, and I slept in Billy's room. And
You weren't. Well, speaking of ghosts, we had that interesting experience in Detroit. We went to a museum. It's like a voodoo museum or something, a museum
Yeah.
of culture. And one of the guides at the museum, who is very kind of proficient and understood ghosts in a profound way, gave us a tip on how to deal with ghosts. And I've
Yes.
used it ever since. This was maybe 4 years ago. And it works every time. She said
It's
that
an African American thing. So
Yeah.
it was it came from Africa.
came from Africa.
Yeah.
And the tip is that if you see a ghost, you meet a ghost, you say the following: "What's your business, ghost?"
Yes.
And then the ghost will just walk away.
Yeah.
And this works. I've tried it because since then I've met it. A couple of ghosts have come to haunt me. And I always say to them, essentially, "What's your business, ghost?" And they're like, They walk away, and that's it.
Yeah, but anyway, at the end of the day, yes, you know, Patty and I are blood relatives, we're cousins,
Yeah.
and I abandoned her in her time of need, but I was 5 going on 6.
Yeah.
You, however, are my husband and an adult, and there are like priests. Well, there was a nun in the back room who theoretically I should have gone to perform an exorcism on my cousin who I thought was possessed.
Yeah.
But I was too scared of her because she told me this story about this dead woman climbing in the window. So I was like, you know, but I was too young to know how to like deal with this situation.
It was hard to determine though whether this was a situation that required an exorcist, or maybe this was like a new hit single that was being recorded at the 2 o'clock in the morning, and I should go get some recording equipment and could like release it as a, you know, Stacy Herbert single on the airwaves, something like that. It was, you know, it was touch and go, it was one or the other at that time. It wasn't clear that it was a malevolent situation at that time. It could have just been like a full throttled voice from the beyond of a Satoshi moment. You have to always keep that possibility open.
You know, we'll have to ask Belinda Carlisle.
Oh, yeah.
She's coming here. See, my throat is like when on paper, I slept like 6 or 7 hours, which is a lot
paper,
for me.
yeah.
On paper. And I like woke up feeling like totally wrecked, and my voice was hurting, and I have bags under my eyes, and I was like, ooh. Like I feel like
I filled in the details. I mean, I offered you some context. I mean,
this-
you wouldn't have known about it at all. You would have been
No.
like had no knowledge of what was happening. Nocturnal ghost sightings and exorcisms were all
But I liked your note. Like I come out there and you're just like, ask Stacy about screaming. It's like
about screaming
what
chair.
yeah. So that was going to be the title of this episode. Is going to be a dozen eggs and a scream, or a dozen eggs and a chair, because I was screaming about a chair. But you know, a lot of people are screaming about the eggs in America. I heard that there's like smuggling going on from eggs to from Mexico crossing the border. Of course, we're flying to Texas soon, so if anybody wants some eggs, like I don't know, we could probably fit it in the carry-on.
Yeah, they got a lot of eggs here in El Salvador. So I went over to Super Selectos, and they're roughly 18 cents an egg.
Yeah.
At the one in San Salvador.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of eggs. There's no shortage of eggs. And then I put that on Twitter and say, well, how much do you pay for eggs where you are? The lowest price I saw was in India for like 5 cents an egg. Other parts of El Salvador, they were paying 15 cents an egg. That seemed to be the lowest price here in El Salvador. Then in like California, people are paying 50, 60, 70 cents an egg. I think I saw 70 cents an egg was maybe the highest price I saw per egg. And yeah, they're smuggling eggs from Mexico over the border. And I saw a funny meme, which was interesting, like how different years now have produced skyrocketing prices in different things. So right now it's eggs. Before that, it was wood. Before that, it was toilet paper.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's like it goes back to this buzz and the meme warfare and the psyops and the gaslighting that goes on from who knows what. It could just be a 4chan joke, or it could be the Fed trying to create inflation. Remember, they were trying to create inflation. So they send out these hoaxes or messages, or like so everybody thinks there's a shortage of eggs, so they go flying out there and get the eggs. The toilet paper stuff was a total absurdity, right? Because you saw images of people like with stacks and stacks, like 10 years supply in their cart at the trolley at the supermarket, trying to buy all, and they were fist fighting each other. These old ladies fighting each other, fat men fighting each other for the toilet paper.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, like, how did this like suddenly erupt? It's like one of those, what do they used to call it? They had that during the Yes Men days of these spontaneous, like people would meet at the train station and like spontaneously do some action.
Yeah.
Like I forget what, there used to be a term for it, but.
Or they, like classical
Flash mob.
musicians.
It was a flash mob.
Flash
Yeah.
mob, yeah.
Yeah. So they would do flash mob. So it's like that was before social media, right? That was before we had Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. We used to have flash mobs, and who organized those, who knows? But now we have flash mobs of like entire like cultures, like flash mob that they, suddenly I saw something like 35% of Australians under the age of like 30 are like transgender. They think they identify as another gender, right? Like, so these are like flash mob things, right? That like suddenly entire, like suddenly eggs, eggs in America are up 138% in the past 12 months. That's the biggest increase on record. Eggs, like we have a long record of what egg prices have been, and this is the hugest, biggest increase and the fastest ever in U.S. history. So that's like a flash mob. Something like crazy happened. Like why? Like there's plenty of eggs here. There's plenty of eggs in Mexico. They're smuggling them across the border. Like, what's this all about?
Right. Well, the Salem witch trials, right? This was an example, looking back, of a society that was infected with a bad meme.
Yeah.
And they went crazy. And now it's a case study in that type of when a group goes crazy. Craziness spreads in a group, and then to get out of that group, you have to do it on your own. Insanity is something as an individual pursuit, whereas insanity happens in groups.
Yeah.
And so now, because of social media and the interconnectivity of all of our day-to-day affairs, and we're all focused on very similar things, these flash mobs and these group psychotic or group formation, psychotic group formation, these types of things are happening one on top of another. So it's like psychotic behavior within psychotic behavior, and it's very disorienting. And for the most part, and without Bitcoin, you think about it, without Bitcoin, we would have absolutely no anchor to reality whatsoever.
Well, I mean, so, you have Fed speak, right? The Fed is always trying to control markets and interest rates and the value of the dollar through Fed speak. So they're just they've always been trying to manipulate people. The plunge protection team, that's how they operate, right? They don't necessarily go into the market and buy up the treasuries. What they do is they have one of their dealers call up the dealers and say, how much would I have to pay for $100 billion worth of treasuries? And they all go like, oh, the Fed's going to buy this. And they all they drive the interest rate to where the Fed wants it. So these are like flash mob. This is something that they're doing over the past, as they were losing control. Remember, so since 2008, we've had the financial crisis. Bitcoin came in, and so we've already said that Bitcoin reveals a lot. And so a lot has been revealed about the character of our monetary system as well.
Right.
And into that, they started printing money. And then the meme warriors of Bitcoin started printing, they came up with the money printer goes burr. So the Fed and the institutions were losing control of their narrative and how to control people through that. So then they created this flash mob of like, oh my God, look, everybody's passing out in the streets of China. Shut down, everybody shut down. Because they were trying to give a reason to we need to come up with an excuse to airdrop $2 million each to all these Americans, because they're not going to if we send it to everybody, then it'll cause hyperinflation. But if we shut down the global economy, maybe they'll believe it and they'll think this is necessary, and they'll abandon all reason. They'll think we're in through the looking glass and somewhere else.
Right. So institutions are designed to put up barriers and roadblocks to bad thinking and psychotic behavior.
Yes.
But what happens when you have a society now around the world where all the institutions have been hyperinflated away to being meaningless, and they're not functioning? It's very dysfunctional. So now these bad ideas that can catch fire, wildfire, and cause havoc, there's nothing there to stop them.
Well, it's interesting that we have a church committee too happening, because the institutions went crazy leading up to Church Committee 1, right? The CIA was trying to hypnotize goats and things like that, and LSD, doing experiments on people with mind control stuff. That was them going crazy, right? That's a whole bunch of bad ideas led to it's almost you create comedy movies out of how absurd they became. It became an absurdist.
Yeah, George Clooney was in a movie, The Man Who Hypnotized Goats.
Yeah, The Man Who Stares at Goats.
The Man Who Stares at Goats.
Yeah, so they did that. And now we have the same thing that how many agencies we have, I don't know, but there's at least 17 or 18 intelligence agencies in the U.S. And they're all focused on these flash mob ideas of manipulating people through Twitter and other social media. So I think they've jumped the shark, and they're in these brainstorming sessions, which have gone horribly wrong.
And now AI, apparently, they're leaning on AI more and more, and AI has its own agenda. I think that debate, whether AI is to be allowed to just be introduced into the environment without any controls or not, is becoming more pressing every day.
And finally, I want to say, because you did bring up the Salem witch trials, and I was actually thinking of that this morning when I was contemplating like my scream and whatever happened at night, and I was like, this is how all those women, what happened in the Salem witch trials. Like if we were back in those days, I might be like being waterboarded right now to see if I sank or something like that. So I thought of it because of what you had said. So when you brought up Salem witch trials, now it kind of felt like we're in the Matrix, because I already thought of the Salem witch trials in relation to my nighttime screaming.
Well, I think that's a good place to end the show, the pod, and give some people something to think about. It's a lot to think about, and it could result in a nightmare or screaming.
And by the way, do note our new backdrops.
Yeah, they're
looking
awesome.
pretty sharp,
They're
right?
very sharp.
Yeah.
There we are.
Maybe I was screaming these into existence. That was what was happening. I was screaming into existence these new backdrops.
I like it.
Okay.
Well, okay. I guess that's it. We're going to do one of these again soon. And bye, y'all.